Protests and demonstrations have continued to rock Chad following a military takeover after veteran ruler Idriss Deby Itno died fighting rebels. Many have taken to the streets of the capital Ndjamena, rejecting the installation of Mahamat Idriss Déby, the son of the late president, as the head of the transitional authority. Now, the masses want the military to step down in favor of a civilian leadership.
We're in a country where human dignity is flouted, and we have had enough. We have suffered a lot, and now it's enough. We want the military power to leave and to let us choose our leaders freely. We are not puppets. We are tired.
Hello and a warm welcome to Africa Today, which will focus on the unfolding crisis in Chad, where the governing military council is cracking down on angry protesters who are defying a ban to demonstrate against the junta that took over power in violation of Chad's constitution. Now, in the second segment of our show, we shall talk about the renewed push to return the famous Benin bronzes looted by Britain during its colonial rule in Nigeria. But why are Nigerians demanding the return of these sculptures? A Nigerian curator here explains.
Edo people is important for Nigerians and important for Africans because it's a huge testimony of our history, of our culture, and of the exquisite craftsmanship that produced these masterpieces.
Join us for more till the end of our show and send us your views and opinion as you watch.
Trouble in Chad. The newly re-elected president of Chad, Idriss Deby, died of wounds he suffered on the front line while commanding his army in battles against rebels in the north last April. The shock news of Deby's death came only the day after the 68-year-old career military man was proclaimed the winner of a presidential election that had given him a sixth term in office. In the aftermath of the death of Idriss Deby, who ruled with an iron fist for 3 decades, his 37-year-old son, Mahamat Deby, was installed as chairman of the Transitional Military Council of Chad. The military takeover has triggered protests, with Chadians insisting that the country is not a monarchy and that the constitution should be followed. Several people have been killed by security forces during protests. A resident of Ndjamena explains here why they came out to protest.
They talk about democracy in theory, but on the ground there's no democracy. That's why people came out today, to protest and demand their rights, because we're fed up.
Now, in a bid to prevent the situation from escalating out of control, the chairman of the Military Council of Chad, Mahamat Deby, has called for dialogue.
Ces valeurs si chères à notre défunt président.
These values, so dear to our late president, will be demonstrated and enshrined in the framework of an inclusive national dialogue that will be organised during this transition period. I will be the guarantor of this dialogue, which will not shy away from any subject of national interest, according to a precise timetable that the government will be called upon to reveal.
Now, former colonial power France has come under sharp criticism for backing the illegal military takeover in Chad for its own vested interests in this North Central African nation. Now, for an incisive analysis on the situation in Chad, we are joined by Abayomi Azikiwe, the editor of the Pan-African Newswire. He has traveled extensively in Africa conducting field research on political economy and history. Thanks a lot for your time, Mr. Azikiwe. Now, what is the current situation in Chad after the killing of Deby and the appointment of his son as the interim president?
It's very tense because there's opposition to the establishment of a transitional military council. The president of the National Assembly was slated to take power in the country in the event of the assassination or the incapacitation of the president. That did not happen. And still not clear exactly under what circumstances President Idriss Deby Itno was killed. The government said he sustained injuries while on the front line against the FACT rebels, yet no specific information has been released to the international press.
Thanks for that, Mr. Abayomi Azikiwe of the Pan-African Newswire.
37-year-old Mahamat Idriss Déby, a 4-star general, is in charge of the Transitional Military Council, which was formed after his father's death. He is therefore acting as the de facto interim president of Chad for a period of 18 months. According to Chad's constitution, which was suspended by the military, the Speaker of the Parliament must take over when a sitting president dies before elections can be held. Leading opposition parties in Chad have rejected the military takeover.
Chad is not a monarchy. There can be no dynastic devolution of power in our country.
Now, under Chadian law, the Speaker of Parliament should have taken power after Déby's death and not his son. Now, why did the army refuse to obey the constitution?
There's concern about the overall stability inside the country. Chad has been a bulwark of France and the United States in their efforts, so-called counterterrorism campaigns in Central and West Africa. So therefore, there was some trepidation in regard to moving forward with the same political dispensation. The son of the president, 37-year-old Mahamat Idriss Itno, was appointed as the chairperson of a transitional military council. Now, it appears to people on the outside of the country and many inside the country that this was a coup d'etat because they did not follow the constitutional protocols that were voted on by the Chadian people. So it's a very serious issue, and also internationally. The African Union wants some movement in regard to the current regime that is operating now in Chad.
Idriss Deby, who came to power in a rebellion in 1990, was an important Western ally in Africa for 3 decades. He facilitated military intervention by France and the US in Africa. Following the death of this veteran ruler, White House offered sincere condolences, while France said it had lost a brave friend. Now, to underscore the importance of Chad to France, Emmanuel Macron was among the foreign dignitaries who attended Idriss Déby's funeral in Ndjamena. This is what he had to say during the funeral.
La France ne laissera jamais personne le remettre en cause et ne laissera jamais personne menacer, ni aujourd'hui, ni demain, la stabilité et l'intégrité du Tchad.
Now, Mr. Azikiwe, as you mentioned earlier, Idriss Déby was a darling of Western powers, especially the United States and France. What are the interests of these imperialist powers in Chad?
Chad is an oil-producing state. It is also located on the border of a number of important countries, such as the Lake Chad Basin region, where Nigeria is located, and Cameroon, which are huge oil-producing states. Also, former President Deby was willing to utilize his military forces as a conduit for AFRICOM, the United States Africa Command, and also Operation Berkane, which is a French military operation in West and Central Africa. And both these militaries are there to represent the interests of Washington, Wall Street, and Paris. They claim they're in the region to strengthen the security capabilities of the various African nations so they can fight against Islamic terrorism. But as many people already know, a lot of the groups that are said to be terrorists previously have been supported by the U.S.
Idriss Deby died of his injuries following clashes with rebels belonging to a group calling itself FACT, or the Front for Change and Concord in Chad, in the northern part of the Central African country. Founded in 2016 by former army officers, the group, like opposition politicians and rights groups in Chad, accused Deby of repression in the run-up to the election. These rebels built up their base in Libya in the Tibesti Mountains, which straddle northern Chad and part of southern Libya. How powerful is the rebel group that killed President Deby?
They were previously based in neighboring Libya. They were allied with Khalifa Haftar, who is the head of the Libyan National Army. And of course, Haftar had been for many years, decades even, an asset of the United States Central Intelligence Agency. Since 2011, he was flown back to Libya during the counter-revolution against the previous Jamahiriya government under Colonel Gaddafi. When Gaddafi was overthrown and killed, Haftar made several bids to take control in Tripoli, all of which were unsuccessful. Now there's a new United Nations appointed government of national unity in Tripoli. And it's interesting that this FACTA rebel group left the country in the immediate aftermath of the establishment of this UN appointed government.
Idriss Deby established ties with the Israeli regime, which provided him with weapons to sustain his brutal grip on power. Chad is among several African countries utilizing deadly weapons acquired from the Israeli regime that are used for repression and other human rights violations.
Now, the Israeli regime fueled the conflict in Chad by supplying Idriss Deby with weapons and thus enabled him to extend his dictatorship. Now, can you elaborate further on the role of the Israeli regime in destabilizing Chad?
Since 2016, there have been contacts between the State of Israel and the Deby administration. Foreign Ministry had visited Chad in 2016. In 2018, the late President Deby visited Israel. So Israel has supplied intelligence assistance as well as weaponry to the Chadian military, which serves as a linchpin in terms of providing ground troops for all these military operations that are going on in Central and West Africa over the last several years. So Israel is very much involved because they want to, of course, be involved in Africa as well because of its strategic resources and also in an attempt to undermine the Palestinian struggle and the struggle in Syria.
Now, the aftershocks of the death of Idriss Deby Itno on April 20 are only beginning to appear. The future of Chad remains fragile and uncertain. Instability in Chad is bound to have far-reaching repercussions across the Sahel region. Now, a resident here expresses fear of clashes between the military and rebels.
War destroys the country. Now there are soldiers who confiscated power, and those guys over there are saying they are going to come. We don't agree. If they come, there must be a dialogue.
Now, Mr. Azikiwe, several people have been killed protesting against the military junta. Now, should we expect a turbulent and violent transition period?
It depends on the political and social balance of forces. It appears as if there's unease in the country among the working people, the youth, and farmers inside the country, and perhaps even elements within the military as well, that this new government was installed without any consultation or any participation on the existing political parties as well as the National Assembly.
Thanks a lot, Mr. Azikiwe, for your insight. Now we shall take a short break, and when we come back, we shall talk about how Western countries are reluctant to return Benin bronzes looted during the British colonial period. Now, don't go away.
looted Benin bronzes in the West.
In 1897, British colonial forces razed Benin City, massacring an unknown number of people and bringing a violent end to the Kingdom of Benin, which had thrived for centuries as one of West Africa's major powers. Now, during the raid, British troops looted at least 3,000 precious items made by the Edo people.
The looted items included ivory statues, carved elephant tusks, ceramics, masks, carved portraits of kings, and more than 1,000 intricately decorated brass plaques that once adorned ancestral altars and court buildings in the city's royal palace. Benin City, situated in modern-day southern Nigeria, was famed for its specialist bronze sculpting guilds, groups of skilled artisans that produced works of huge historic and cultural importance. The looted bronze statues have spread further and further afield over the years, popping up periodically across Europe and the United States. Now there are increasing calls for the return of these precious cultural heritage items.
We want outright return of those things here. They belong here, this is where they were made, and we know the purpose, the reason why we made them.
Now, to discuss the return of these looted cultural heritage items belonging to the people of Benin in Nigeria, we have contacted Julius Mbaluto, an African affairs analyst. Thanks a lot, Mr. Mbaluto, and it's great having you. Now, first, can you tell us how important are the Benin bronzes to the people of Nigeria and Africa actually in general?
Very, very important, because most of the artifacts or even sculptures represent the cultural mix, the cultural heritage of a country. And therefore, when we talk about all these bronzes, they represent the culture of Benin City, you know, everybody from that particular country where they were taken from. They also represent like the history, the heritage of the Kingdom of Benin. We are speaking right now, the British Museum has got about 900 pieces of that. Benin court has requested them to be taken back, but the negotiations are still ongoing. That's where we are with that.
Julius Mbaluto, there, African affairs analyst.
Western art historians and museum professionals claim that various forms of danger in the West have historically posed just as much as of a threat to the Benin bronzes as a perceived lack of climatic control found at Nigerian museums.
Now, this while Africans have been making their artifacts and preserving them for centuries before they were looted by European invaders. A Nigerian craftsman from the Benin region speaks here on how the art of sculpture making runs in the family.
My family has been doing this artwork for the past 600 years. Right from the time of Obaewa, it was not making money business. It was only to worship the Oba, to keep events. That's how they were doing it then, because our ancestors then, they wasn't selling it. It had been taken to the palace and to some high-ranking chiefs.
Now, some museum professionals claim Nigeria and Africa in general does not have the technical capacity to take care of its cultural heritage. What's your take?
African professionals are capable of doing anything that the Western countries can do, given the chance. And therefore, to say Nigerian professionals are not experts in how to keep is just an insult, adding an insult to injury. What they need to do is just take these artifacts back. They need to just take everything they took from these countries back, because this is part of these countries' heritage.
Now, amid mounting calls for restitution, institutions like the British Museum, holder of the world's largest collection of Benin bronzes, have been forced to consider returning the stolen heritage items.
A new museum is being built in Benin City to facilitate this. But as it stands, most of the looted bronzes will only be returned on a temporary, not permanent basis. A resident of Benin City, like most of his compatriots, rejects the preposterous idea of loaning the bronzes instead of permanently returning them.
the question I may ask, is it their own property? Why should you loan my own property to me? You cannot loan my own property to me. You understand? They stole it quite well.
Why are most Western museums insisting on a temporary return of these looted heritage items instead of permanently returning them to where they rightly belong in Africa?
The countries that have housed all this, for example, like talk about if you came to London and say, oh, let all this go back to the countries that it came from. Most of these museums will be left empty. You know, these museums in London, they make so much money from tourists who go to see all these things. And, you know, the key thing is that it's all about the money involved. And therefore, you find that definitely the wealth they are making, they don't want that to let that go. That's why it's so difficult to get it done.
The people of Nigeria are eager to reconnect with their looted heritage, but it remains to be seen if museums in Western countries will stop their greed and return these looted items of African heritage.
The governor of Edo State, whose capital is Benin City, says talks are ongoing about returns that are expected to be a boost for a broader movement building across Africa and beyond, seeking colonial-era loot.
We would, you know, be open to such conversations. So there's just not one track decision as to whether it's going to be on loan or a permanent return. You know, we will be open to having a broad range of discussions on each piece of work.
Mr. Baluto, our last question to you. Now, will the return of these Benin bronzes have a domino effect that will see the eventual return of other African heritage artifacts looted by colonialists?
One of the fears that countries that looted all this wealth from Africa fear, if they say yes to one country, there will be a domino effect. Other countries whose wealth was looted, they will follow suit. And that has always been the greatest fear. How do I know? Probably. I covered the Mahamat veterans case in courts in London, which they won. One of the greatest fear was another country would pursue the same line. And it's not just one country, it's many. So the fear of the domino effect is always there, definitely. And yes, if we cannot say just this Benin bronze. It's been done successfully in Kenya. There's one of the tribes, Kalenjin. Some artifacts were returned to them. So now that it didn't follow suit, it doesn't mean it cannot follow suit. It depends on how it is done. And depending on how it is done and so how successful it becomes, yes, there could be a domino effect. Probably that's why the people who are holding all these artifacts fear.
Well, one thing that should be made clear is that the return of these looted artifacts is not a favor by Western museums to African countries, but it is correcting historical injustices committed against the people of Africa. That's it for this edition of Africa Today. Thanks for watching, and drop us a line through our social media handle. We appreciate your comments. Goodbye for now.